Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today for Making Collections Matter, a symposium. My name is Kim Conaty, and I'm the Stephen and Ann Ames Curator of Drawings and Prints at the Whitney. And I'm here today with my co-organizer and colleague, Jane Panetta, the Whitney's Nancy and Fred Pose's Curator and Director of the collection. And together, we extend a warm welcome. Whether you're joining us online or here in the Susan and John Hess Family Theater at the Whitney, it's wonderful to have you with us. Before Jane and I begin our introductory remarks to today's symposium, I'd like to share some access information. For those joining through the live stream, you can access closed captioning in English by turning on this feature on the options bar. Thank you to our captioners, Bonnie Rothermel and Annette Widman. If you're here with us in the theater, please note that restrooms are located outside of the theater on this floor. If you need to exit for any reason during the program, please use the doors at the back of the room where you entered. And first, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The Whitney is located in Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral homeland of the Lenape. The name Manhattan comes from their word Mannahatta, meaning island of many hills. The museum's current site is close to land that was a Lenape fishing and planting site called Sapakanakan, or tobacco field. The Whitney acknowledges the displacement of this region's original inhabitants and the Lenape diaspora that exists today. As a museum of American art in a city with vital and diverse communities of Indigenous people, the Whitney also recognizes the historical exclusion of Indigenous artists from its collection and program. As part of our work at the museum, we're committed to addressing these erasures and honoring the perspectives of Indigenous artists and communities as we work towards a more equitable future. If you're joining us online, please take a moment to identify and recognize the Indigenous people who have always and continue to steward the land from which you're joining us. So, making collections matter. I want to start with this idea, which is one that we see as both a given and a prompt. If institutions have existing collections, if we continue to collect and continue to steward these collections, what for? And perhaps most germane to today's conversations, how are we doing this work? And what are some of the common and also particular considerations at play for different institutions? These are questions we've been thinking about a lot at the Whitney, and quite intensively over the past few years as we've been working to develop the museum's first collection strategic plan, which has evolved through a multi-year research project supported by the Henry Luce Foundation. In fact, the seeds for much of this work began over a decade ago when the Whitney was planning its new downtown building, which was to have greatly expanded gallery space for the permanent collection, something that the institution had identified as a critical need. In the run-up to the opening show downtown, which was, of course, the 2015 Full Museum Collection exhibition, America is Hard to See, much of the museum's staff had begun doing more ambitious, deep dives into the collection and really asking, what stories are we consistently telling, but what have we overlooked in our own bays and flat files? And what are the areas in need of growth, reframing, and further interrogation? The inaugural show was a key marker for the Whitney, but it was important that this major collection reassessment was not the final word, but rather the start of much more. And indeed, in the subsequent years, the Whitney has organized 24 collection displays downtown, experimenting with different exhibition formats and spaces, from longer-running dynamic chronological displays to thematic cross-medium ones that explore the collection through various lenses, ideas around craft, the algorithm, protest, and modernism. In the 5 years following the museum's downtown, twice as many collection works were exhibited in the building than in the previous 5. And just to give you a sense of what that means at the Whitney in terms of quantity, nearly 2,600 collection artworks were shown between 2015 and 2020, which is roughly 1/10 of the Whitney's total collection. The consistent collection work necessary to prepare for these shows has involved a great deal of research and discussion. There are histories to study and reflect upon, but also material considerations that relate to the life of objects and our role in caring for them. There are also conversations with living artists that bring into high relief the importance of these ongoing relationships. Collection work and the ambition of making a collection matter extends far beyond the museum's walls. And through our conversations with peers while developing our research for the collection strategic plan, we recognize that we're hardly alone in many of these objectives and challenges, both practical and philosophical. First and foremost, collection work is work. There is a tremendous and often under-acknowledged amount of labor, time, and cost that goes into it, from moving an object for a viewing to photographing a new acquisition or cataloging a time-based media work. Also, collections continue to grow, but our storage often does not. Is there such a thing as sustainable growth? Collections have long histories formed by the tastes and interests of legions of directors, curators, and donors before. What is our responsibility to what came before us, and how can we meaningfully address what has been omitted, amplify key institutional histories, and create scholarly opportunities around in-depth holdings? Collections are particular, and that particularity is important. Every collection has an important role to play within a broader ecology of institutions and in serving diverse publics and local audiences. We don't need to see the same works by the same group of artists in every museum. On the contrary, if the museum serves as a frame or platform, might we focus on what it means for a work to live on in a particular place with a particular mission? For the Whitney, this happens to be a very big question, and one that has been with us since our founding by an artist, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, and as a museum of American art. Can our work grow out of a deep commitment to and ethos around supporting artists? Can we consistently and increasingly interrogate the term American and utilize an expansive and nuanced interpretation of this term to establish a more dynamic collection that really reflects the diversity that exists within the US? Many of the most important conversations we have had throughout this collection strategic plan process have been with curators and collection staff at other institutions and within our own, as well as those thinkers in the field who are considering the meaning of collections through a critical lens, and we're very eager to hear from many of them today.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim, and thank you all again for being here. We're so happy to be here with all of you. So just to pick up where Kim left off, I wanted to sort of share our overall plans for the day and talk a bit about why and how we arrived at the particular questions we're hoping to cover. The day is going to be structured around 3 panels, followed by a moderated discussion for each of them. Those will be moderated by Kim, myself, and our wonderful colleague David Breslin, who's the former director of the collection. And each panel will be related to what we saw as key questions facing collections. 3 panels that we imagine will feel deeply interconnected and often overlapping, and we kind of expect and welcome that. The 3 panels are collecting in practice, collecting use, and collecting for the future. Before digging into how collections are used and how they might function or be in the future, we were eager to establish a foundation for the day, hearing most fundamentally how institutional collections are currently being built and what issues have come before them or informed recent or resulting collecting. As we've considered our own way forward for the Whitney's collection strategic plan, we've routinely come back to the significance of our own institutional history, and as Kim alluded to, be it around our work with living artists, our exhibition history, or the significant omissions within our collection. Ultimately, this combination of our institutional history and our examination of it and the necessary questions that raises, combined with our recent and already existing collecting practices, have landed us, I think, where we are today, and have sort of provided what I always think of as like this faint roadmap for how we're embarking on our collection strategic plan. We wanted today and the symposium to mimic this interrelationship between the historical and contemporary collecting practices. How might past histories and collecting practices fuse with current collecting undergird and productively inform future plans? Accordingly, the first panel will be focused on what we are calling collecting in practice, and will consider the ways in which institutions are reframing and advancing what modern and contemporary art museum collections are or can be through their actual collecting, through their objects. Specifically, and as part of this, we imagine that this panel would cover questions such as what is your institution's current model and our strategy for building an inclusive and dynamic collection? Has your institution's historical collecting impacted your current approach? How does your institution's particular mission, scale, geography, or focus drive these collecting practices? And increasingly, what are the ethical concerns around amassing collections, many of them now vast? Over the past year, and after discussions, as Kim alluded to also, with so many of our colleagues within and beyond the Whitney, we've heard often, and we feel this acutely ourselves, I would say, both practical concerns around limited storage, further compounded by a nagging concern about what are we doing amassing or even hoarding all of this work? What does this mean? As a result, and certainly for us at the Whitney, there has been an increasing desire to therefore think more about what the idea of use of a collection could mean. While perhaps most often associated with an object's physical presence as a work in the space of an exhibition, it's also the possibilities beyond this space that feel increasingly critical. This may mean an increased use in a digital space, an object's ability to establish a cultural and historical record as a means to engaging with a particular community or audience, or even a work's ability as an acquisition to, however modestly, help support an artist and their legacy. Building on this, the second panel will therefore focus on the issue of collection use. Once collected, what happens to a work in our institutions? How are objects then used in the galleries vis-a-vis audience, or for scholarship and collaboration in virtual spaces? And how is this notion of use being reimagined? Are there ways your institution is fundamentally reconsider how we can creatively expand these definitions and boundaries of how collections are used? Here, we hope to probe beyond the objects exclusively and into the spaces they might occupy in an institution, non-gallery, but also conceptual after arriving into a collection. For the final panel of the day, we'll consider the question of collecting for the future. And here, we hope to consider the practical realities of collection work alongside innovative strategies and how all of that is imaginatively and productively providing these kind of actionable ways forward. So I think we really like the way this third panel will build on the previous two panels. Our hope is that this panel will consider the ethical and practical implications for building and caring for collections now and in the future. Specifically, we imagine discussions around questions such as how might we envision collections in the future? How might we sustainably care for ever-growing collections? How does the changing nature of artworks impact our work, and what does that mean for collections? Do we want to continue to ambitiously grow collections, and how do we care for and manage and prioritize even artists' relationships in relation to this collecting? We also want to flag how grateful we are for the many participants here at today's event. This truly feels meaningful to Kim and I. During the pandemic, and with the great help of the Walker, I would say, and while working on our own collection strategic plan, we were fortunate enough to participate in a number of cross-institutional convenings, with many of you that are here in the room even, and specifically to discuss collection initiatives, challenges, long-term plans, aspirations. It was eye-opening for us and also fortifying, I would say, to most basically realize that so much of what we were grappling with was very similar to other museums and the questions they were facing. It solidified for us, I think, a renewed interest in these conversations across institutions, and really as an essential aspect to how we might aspire to do our most expansive thinking. While the line from museum to artist, or museum to audience, or museum to patron even, is all too firmly imprinted, I think, the possibility of this line extending from institution to institution, where an essential exchange of ideas might take place, suddenly felt under-recognized. Having all the participants in this space together today therefore feels especially important, and like an example of idea sharing at its best, and in the case of collection museum work, also at its rarest. So a big thank you to everyone who's here presenting. Before I conclude and pass this back to Kim, I wanted to say a few very key thank yous. First, a huge thank you and debt of gratitude to the Luce Foundation and to Terry Carbone specifically, who's been a big support to us in many, many ways through this project. A big thank you also to all the terrific panelists who are here, and we will obviously introduce all of them individually before each panel, and to our colleagues here at the Whitney who've been so supportive, Adam Weinberg, Scott Rothkopf, and David, who will be moderating the second panel. We also want to thank our education colleagues, Megan Hoyer and Andy Hawks, for their tireless help and guidance in organizing the event. And lastly, I'd like to thank our collection strategic plan team, Roxanne Smith, English Cook, and most of all, Ramsey Colber, for all of her wise help in organizing today, but also for her essential thinking and contributions to what today could and should look like. Thank you so much again to all of you for being here in person and virtually, and I'm going to pass this back to Kim, who will introduce the first panel. Thanks so much.
Hello again, and thank you for joining us for session 1, Collecting in Practice. This session will open our symposium today with some foundational questions about collection work today. How are institutions approaching the task of reframing and advancing what modern and contemporary art museum collections can be? The presentations that will follow will address the broader questions as it is considered across 4 institutions: the Studio Museum Harlem, the High Museum of Art, the Walker Art Center, and the National Gallery of Art. Each institution, as you will hear, has a distinct mission and specific goals and considerations with regard to its collection, and we'll hear from each presenter or pair of presenters, then join each other on stage for a discussion. I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists now. From the Studio Museum in Harlem, we have a pair of panelists. First, Sydney Briggs is the Director of Collections and Exhibitions at the Studio Museum in Harlem. She has a 20-year career in registration and collection management, working with a range of institutions, including the Museum of Modern Art and Sotheby's. She is presently a board member of the Association of, wrong slide. Okay. She is presently a board member of the Association of Registrars and Collection Specialists, ARCS, from 2021 to 2023, as well as the recently formed Traveling Exhibitions Working Group for the Association of African American Museums. Connie Choi is her colleague at the Studio Museum, where she is Associate Curator of the Permanent Collection. Connie serves on the advisory committees of the Andrew Humphrey Family Foundation and the Shirley Fitterman Art Center at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. Thanks to both of you for being here. Dr. Katherine Jentleson is the Merrie and Dan Boone Curator of Folk and Self-Taught Art at the High Museum of Art and co-executive editor of Panorama, Journal of the Association of Historians of American Art. Since joining the High 7 years ago, she has overseen 8 exhibitions, including Really Free, the radical art of Nellie Mae Rowe, which is currently on view at the Brooklyn Museum, PSA, and strategically grown the collection by more than 600 objects. Thank you for being here, Katherine. Pavel Pish is joining us from the Walker Art Center, where he's been curator of visual arts since 2016 and has organized projects across the Walker's galleries, theater, cinema, corridors, and the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden. In his work on the permanent collection, Pavel led the development of the Curatorial team's 2018 long-range acquisitions plan, revised documents and processes relating to the collection of artist demographic information, and acquired many works specifically focused on interdisciplinary acquisitions of works by artists working between visual and performing arts, such as Ligia Lewis, Carolyn Lazard, Trisha Brown, Joan Jonas, Sarah Michelson, and Maria Hasabi. Thank you for being here, Pavel. Finally, Carmen Ramos is joining us from the National Gallery of Art. And since 2021, she has been Chief Curatorial and Conservation Officer there in Washington, D.C. She leads the curatorial and conservation teams as they serve the nation and beyond through collections development, groundbreaking scholarship, art conservation, and scientific research. Ramos previously served as the acting chief curator and curator of Latinx art at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, where she built one of the largest collections of Latinx art at a museum of U.S. art. Thank you, Carmen, for being here. And now I will welcome Connie and Sydney to the podium.
Good morning. Thank you to Jane and Kim for the invitation to be here today. And I look forward to learning from my colleagues here on this panel and on the other two panels later on this afternoon. I'm going to be speaking briefly about the history of the Studio Museum in Harlem's collection and how it has guided our collecting practices today. I'll then pass it on to my colleague Sydney, who will speak about how our collecting and institutional missions inform the many ways in which we steward the collection. Unlike many museums, including the one we're at right now, the Studio Museum in Harlem did not begin as a collecting institution. In fact, our founders quite deliberately chose not to collect works because they felt that it would keep them from being responsive to what was happening in the art world and society at large. As Eleanor Holmes Norton said when the museum first opened, quote, "When you have the vested interest of a collection, you lose the desire to innovate. We're trying to do something other museums aren't. We want to show new work that the older establishments aren't onto," end quote. Our founders understood the physical and financial impact that a collection would have on our fledgling institution, and they wanted to instead direct their efforts toward supporting the work of living artists of African descent. Ironically, it was the artists themselves who recognized the deep importance of an institutional collection, one that would care for and exhibit their works in perpetuity. And the Studio Museum began receiving gifts of artwork as early as 1970, just 2 years after the museum opened to the public. As you see in this slide, many early gifts to the collection were given by artists, including Dana C. Chandler on the left, who gifted the first works to the collection, a group of prints, including the one here, Romare Bearden, whose work Conjure Woman is at center, and Elizabeth Catlett, who gave several works following her 1971-72 solo exhibition at the museum. These early gifts, which came in before the museum established an official collecting policy in 1977 under the leadership of Dr. Merrie Schmidt-Campbell, speak to the investment from the museum's inception in supporting the work of living artists of African descent. We have continued to uphold this mission in our commitment to acquiring work by living artists, and in particular, emerging artists. And we're often the first institutional collection, or the first in New York City, for many of these artists. On the left here, we see a photograph documenting Autumn Night's Wall, the museum's first, and so far only performance in the collection. Night was a 2016-17 artist in residence at the museum, and my former colleague Hallie Ringel, who managed the Artist in Residence program at the time, was deeply invested in ensuring that Night's performance practice was represented in the collection. After acquiring the work in 2017, the museum, led by my colleague Eric Booker, was in conversation with the artist for over a year, figuring out together with her how the work could best live in the collection. These conversations culminated in a performance of the work in 2019 that enabled us to document the work in its entirety and ensured we had all the necessary information to perform Wall in the future. This investment in the work went beyond what we might normally expect for an acquisition, but it was one we committed to given our mission and the learning opportunities it presented for both the museum and the artist. On the right, we see another photograph, this one by James Vanderzee, one of several thousand by the artist that the Studio Museum now jointly cares for with the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Spearheaded by Thelma Golden, Director and Chief Curator of the Studio Museum, and Jeff Rosenheim, Joyce F. Menschel, Curator in charge of the Department of Photographs at the Met, this collaboration between the two institutions, announced just last year, will expand access to, research on, and understanding of Vanderzee's incredibly important career. The Studio Museum entered this partnership with the Met, knowing the enormity of the task of cataloging, digitizing, and conserving this archive, which consists of nearly 20,000 lifetime prints, 30,000 negatives, and ephemera for the future. The possibilities that a partnership presents, with each institution contributing knowledge and perspectives informed by their unique history and mission, means that we can continue to serve the artist's legacy by encouraging new scholarship on and bringing new audiences to these works. And importantly, the Studio Museum, whose collection up till now has largely consisted of contemporary work, has embarked on this endeavor because van der Zee's photographs, created throughout the first half of the 20th century, hold continued resonance for artists working today, as well as audiences in general. These recent additions to the collection are just two examples of many that speak to how the Studio Museum embodies its mission to support the work of artists of African descent within its collecting practices. I'm going to now turn it over to Sydney, who will provide more examples of how we action stewardship beyond just acquisitions.
Thank you, Connie. And thank you, Jane and Kim, for inviting me today. I want to just start by saying, and really resonating with Kim very much, that the question of making collections matter really involves the consideration of objects which comprise these collections that we're going to be discussing today, but also that we really do need to remember the people, that it's very much centered in the people. And it's the people that make the work, the artists themselves, but also the people who care for these works. They're the people who research, who exhibit, who preserve, and who document these works, and that their work is often hidden. And thank you so much for actually bringing it to light today. At the Studio Museum in Harlem, our mission is to be a nexus for artists of African descent, and therefore their work is situated, we work to situate their work and platform their work so that the artists are, I'm sorry, I just got a little bit confused, but where our work is, we work to situate and platform the artists through our renowned programs, many of which are the Expanding the Walls program that we work with young students, as well as our well-renowned Artist in Residence program. And I specifically am referring to that program because our collection stewardship really privileges advocacy and empowerment of artists and the makers. And by doing that, we're arming them with knowledge and assisting them in their development of professional networks. We support their ability to navigate and stake their place in the art world. And I'm sorry, I didn't turn my slide. I'm a mess today. Okay. That basically, what we're doing is we're introducing them to best practices in handling artworks. We're educating them in documentation techniques. We're engaging them in conversations around the conditions for display of their art and their needs and their intentions. Like, this is what the work actively is for us in collection stewardship with living artists. And this really offers them access to professionals to increase their materials and technological knowledge. That this is actually one of the most important things that we do when we are supporting the artists that that are part of our Artist in Residence program and our ETW. We're actually really giving them access that they don't normally have, and therefore empowering them so that they can go out into the larger art world and speak the same language, and be able to flourish. We are also quite mindful that we hold an important legacy of historical objects and a deep archive as well of the museum's history. And that as caretakers of this history, we are actively engaged in furthering the accessibility for artists and scholars and the public of this history. And in more traditional terms, this stewardship means that we invest in storage, and creating storage that is accessible and close by for our curators and for artists and for the public to be able to actively have access to things. But also we're investing in the digitization of our collection, which is probably the most effective way to really open up collections and activate them. And we're investigating equitable loan systems so that we can encourage more sharing of our collection with smaller institutions that maybe aren't so well resourced, and also engaging in co-ownership with larger institutions so that we can, it's not just a matter of owning things, it's also a matter of sharing and broadening the networks that we create. Because a lot of this activity is actually quite closed, and in creating more relationship with other institutions, we're actually able to broaden that and allow more people to have access to this knowledge. I would say all of these efforts rely on and privilege people, right? And they also highlight the need to invest and support these people, these skilled people who who labor intensely to conserve our artworks, to document them, and to handle them. So I'm talking about our art handlers, our conservators, database managers, people who specialize in logistics and moving things. This is all such hidden labor, and it's very important that we understand that there's money that is attached to this. There is commitment by these people who have taken years to really develop a very strong skill set. And I'm sorry, I just keep turning everything back. And that with that is a hidden history, that is where the hidden histories are in our collections. That when we invest in these people so that they actually can open up our collections, that we actually allow our collections to truly matter, to express who we are as a people and a nation. Thank you.
Good morning. I also would like to begin by thanking Jane and Kim and Ramsey and all of the wonderful colleagues at the Whitney Museum of Art here for organizing this today and for bringing us all together. It's really an honor to be with this group of panelists. So you may recognize this 4-story white exterior that I'm showing you on this slide as it appears in the movie Black Panther. But it's also the wing where most of the High Museum of Art's permanent collection, which is comprised of 7 different curatorial departments, is displayed. It was designed by Richard Meyer Architects and completed in 1983, by which time the High had begun collecting the work of artists who create painting, sculpture, textiles, and work in other media despite a lack of formal training, and are thus hailed as folk and self-taught artists by the department that I have overseen for the last 7 years. The museum accessioned its first such work in 1975, the still life painting that appears at slide right by the Georgia artist Marilu O'Kelly. When the museum's then director saw the painting hanging for sale in the gift shop, he thought O'Kelly's rendering of fresh spring produce remarkable enough to be in the permanent collection. The next decade was marked by similarly intuitive purchases championed by different curators and education staff, including a very prescient 1982 purchase of 30 drawings by the Alabama artist Bill Traylor, represented at slide left by a dynamic scene of a blue-suited man towering over smaller figures working a structure beneath his feet. The same year that the High made its purchase, Traylor's drawing of a coiled black snake was chosen for the cover of Black Folk Art in America, an exhibition organized by the Corcoran Gallery of Art that toured nationally. While it was on view here in New York at the Brooklyn Museum in the summer of 1982, the new museum also was presenting the work of Howard Finster, a preacher, artist, and environment builder who transformed his property in Northwest Georgia into Paradise Garden, an art environment that you can still visit today. These shows are but a few examples of how Southern self-taught artists had earned enough visibility in New York and other major cities in the last decades of the 20th century that the High felt compelled to step up its commitment and leadership in this area, formally establishing a department with a dedicated curator in 1994. The collection grew in leaps and bounds over the next decade, with a 1996 collaboration with Howard Finster to preserve major works from Paradise Garden that have since remained on perpetual view in museum displays like this one. Also in 1996, museum trustee T. Marshall Hahn formally pledged his collection, which provided the High with a mini survey of the field's emerging canon that was especially rich with artists from Alabama and Georgia, including Atlanta's own Nellie Mae Rowe. Between 1998 and 2003, art dealer Judith Alexander gave to the High more than 130 artworks by Rowe, including this joyful, free-flowing self-portrait, which serves as the catalog cover for our current touring exhibition now on view at the Brooklyn Museum. The High's first decade of collection building in this area thus responded to and perpetuated a significant mainstream enthusiasm for self-taught artists, which has resurged with new force over the past decade, and I would argue is truly unprecedented, based on the many significant museum exhibitions that have revived and included self-taught artists, as well as the dozens of museums that have completed major acquisitions with the Souls Grown Deep Foundation in recent years. In 2017, the High became the third museum to be a part of this program, with a gift purchase of 54 works, distinguished by a major group of painted assemblages by Alabama artist Thornton Dial. This slide shows a detail from looking out the windows. Dial's memorial to the children who perished in a World Trade Center daycare on 9/11, made from an array of plastic and fabric toys, woven together in a complex web of carpet, rope, and chicken fence. For the past 3 years, we have been working with conservators to better identify the underlying materials and complex armatures that Dial created for assemblages through processes like X-radiography, and I'm showing you also a composite image of X-rays of one portion of the piece. With acquisitions like these, our department has maintained its regionalist focus, which feels justified because of how these artists are still grossly underrepresented in most museum collections. That being said, I don't see my department's collection as best defined by the schematic diagram seen at slide right. It has never been and never will be a collection strictly bound by taxonomies like chronology, geography, media, and level or mode of training, which in itself is such a problematic concept that has contributed to the term warfare that continues to stymie our field and has done so for the better part of a century. Instead, I see this collection existing and developing across axes, with a critical mass around artists without formal training, working in the southeastern United States, mostly in the past 50 years, but there will always be outliers. Take, for instance, this 2018 acquisition at slide right, a beaded voodoo flag by Haitian artist Merland Constant, depicting the dark-suited arbiter of the underworld, Baron Cimetière. I recently presented this piece in our galleries with several drawings by Bill Traylor, for whom the dapperly dressed, top-hatted, pipe-smoking man is a frequent subject and has been tied by various scholars to trickster figures that originated in Central and West African belief systems and reappeared throughout diasporic visual and oral traditions across the global South, from Haiti to Alabama. Another collection outlier is A Friend in Need is a Friend Indeed, by Henry Church, a 19th century Ohio artist who was trained as a blacksmith. From a single slab of sandstone punctuated by the artist's own ironwork, Church modeled a shepherd protecting his lamb from a ferocious mountain lion, who was in turn being attacked by the shepherd's loyal dog, in a parable of self-sacrifice that speaks not only to Church's religious beliefs, but also to his family's sheltering of enslaved people on their way to Canada. Presently, this sculpture sits at the convergence of a sculpture court, filled with pieces by Thornton Dial, his son Richard Dial, his cousin Ronald Lockett, and his peers Charlie Lucas and Lonnie Hawley, who worked throughout Alabama's Rust Belt, creating art that, like Church's, demonstrated learned skills in metalwork and a tendency towards social commentary, often told through abstracted human and animal forms. Formally trained artists from the modern and contemporary collection, including Nancy Graves, Ed Love, and Mark DeSuvero, also appear throughout this gallery in pairings explained in labels that center on topics like material, formal structures, and subject matter. This gallery is an example of how I began integrating work from across our 7 curatorial departments around themes like the still life tradition, the civil rights era, and African diasporic traditions when we reinstalled our permanent collection galleries in 2018. Just this past summer, I co-curated a temporary permanent collection show with Mellon undergraduate curatorial fellows Nyla Barnes, Nayaradzai Mahachi, and Sojourner Hunt called Off the Grid. This slide shows the introductory gallery, which included a series of 16 etchings by Saul LeWitt, a quilt by Gee's Bend artist Agatha Bennett, and a pair of photographs of building facades by Harry Callahan, and gives a taste of the show's premise, which was to confirm but reorient the late 1970s observation of Rosalind Krauss about the ubiquity of grids in 20th century art. As this exhibition explored, minimalist painters and sculptors were not the only ones to respond to the grid's formal, spiritual, and material possibilities. In pursuit of a future where self-taught artists are seen as part of, rather than a footnote to, larger histories like these, I try to collect objects that have the potential to dialogue across our collection, like this brightly painted stand-in shelf at Slide Right, whose maker is not yet identified, but used it in a black barbershop in West Virginia around the middle of the last century. My justification for acquiring this piece considered how it would dialogue with another hand-carved late 19th century cabinet made from recycled wood in our collection, as well as objects that represent the artistic skill involved in black hair work, from early 1970s portraits by Nigerian photographer J.D. Odekere, to the many wood carvings we have by artists who also worked as barbers, like Elijah Pierce and Ulysses S. Davis, whose Black Jesus on the Cross appears at Slide Left. Another example is our 2022 acquisition of a painting by Lonnie Hawley, a quilt painting, whose overlapping silhouetted forms represent the people, especially the women who supported the artist in his lifetime. Hawley used the quilt intentionally as an index of women's labor, as well as the quilt's ever not quite status within enduring media-based hierarchies of art, which has also been challenged by other artists in our collection, including, of course, Faith Ringgold, whose Sunny's Bridge is at Slide Left. That quilt and quilt-adjacent work falls at the intersection of 5 of our 7 curatorial departments should mean that we have a leading collection of textile-oriented artists. But instead, it has meant that quilts, especially those made by Black women, have fallen into a kind of no man's land. Dozens of acquisitions we've made over the past 5 years have begun to remedy this historical erasure, including Jenny Petway's medallion quilt, seen pictured at Setter here, as well as Loretta Petway's Birds in the Air quilt at Slide Right in this, my final slide. When Amy Sherrill talked about the Millie dress that First Lady Michelle Obama wore in her groundbreaking portrait, she spoke about the dress's embodiment of different traditions of abstraction, including those cultivated by Gee's Bend quilters like Petway. In May, we acquired a related quilt at Wright, made by Atlanta artist Carolyn White, who unpacks the connection between Petway, Sherrill, and First Lady Obama through one more layer, the sensational moment when a little girl named Parker Curry responded with awe to Sherrill's portrait, exploding the internet and inspiring the children's book, Parker Looks Up. White's quilt will go on view in conversation with a selection of work centered on the theme of Black girlhood, curated by our recent Mellon Fellow Nyla Barnes later this year. I hope you will come and see it, and I thank you for your time.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me here, to Jane and Ramsey and Kim and colleagues, many of whom, we were just remarking before we started, many of whom we have met in person over Zoom, but not really in person, so it's really nice to actually be here with everyone. My name's Pavel Pish. I'm a curator in the Visual Arts Department at the Walker Arts Center, and today I just want to paint a broad picture of how the Walker's collection came to be and how that legacy of the collection informs our thinking. And I want to do that by talking in very broad strokes at an artistic, conceptual, strategic level, but then really talk about it in a granular sense, because I think it's really important that when we look at developing collections, and Sydney really spoke to this beautifully in terms of just the sheer time and human investment in building these resources, there's a lot of also very boring administrative stuff. And it's actually very, very important. And through that administrative work, it's actually how we keep accountable and how we keep growing our collections. So I'll touch upon that, and I will try to do that in 10 minutes. So I'll start with the founder, with T.B. Walker, whom you can see here. T.B. Walker was a lumber baron who made his fortune in Minnesota in the late 19th century. And he was also a very energetic collector who didn't have a very particular focus in his collecting. He really looked at many, many different things. He collected 16th to 19th century European paintings. He collected weaponry. He collected Chinese jade objects. He collected ceramics, and you can see some of these items in his home. He gifted the collection to the city, and then under the WPA, the Walker became an art center. And I think it's really important to remember that even though he had this vast collection, actually, there's barely anything in our collection now that actually used to belong to him. There's maybe 1 or 2 objects. So we've actually deaccessioned the majority of his collection. And so while his tastes don't bear on what's in the collection, certainly the revenue and the generosity of those funds seeded acquisition endowments, especially in the late 70s and the late 90s, from which we have an annual draw. But that draw didn't really come into play in terms of purchases until much later, which means that when you look at the Walker's collection from the 40s onwards, it was really developed through the generosity of donors and through gift giving. And that is important to state because when you look at the collection, you see a picture of mid-century or 60s, 70s US canonical figures, let's say. So, of course, figures like Barnett Newman, Richard Serra, Jasper Johns, Isamu Noguchi, Agnes Martin. But it's important to remember that that gift-giving was guided by tastes, by a horizon of tastes that was limited, a horizon of tastes that was shepherded by Walker curators, especially the Walker's director, Martin Friedman, at that time. And so it's not surprising that when we look at the collection from that period, it is heavily US-centric, it's heavily male, and it's heavily white. And so when we think about the collection, for us now, looking at areas of historical paucity and gaps is not something that we're really championing so much. We do that through very strategic acquisitions. You can see some of those here, like the incredible Carmen Herrera sculpture, which we acquired in a good time before the Whitney show so that we could still afford it. And then on the other side, a current collection display which looks at, again, actually the grid and abstraction through a juxtaposition of a work by Tauba Auerbach together with an incredible work by Jack Whitten and Agnes Martin. And so when you think about our collection, when you look at our holdings, I think it's really important to remember that when we look statistically, and I think, my presentation will kind of veer between these larger questions, but also I'll keep going back to numbers because I think it was Naomi Beckwith in one of our conversations, she reminded us that parity lies in numbers, and those words really ring in my mind whenever we talk about collections and when we talk about shifting and changing the demographic makeup of a collection. And so the 50 top artists in the Walker's collection, whose works are held in depth, they actually amount to over 50% of the works in the entire collection. But 50 artists in our collection is only 2.3% of artists in the entire collection, which means that of a collection of 2,400 artists, 50 represent over half of our collection, which is pretty wild. Of those 50 artists, only 2 are artists of color and only 8 are women artists. And so from a numbers perspective, I think it's interesting to think about that because how do you really change a collection if you have such vast, vast, vast holdings, if you have vast repositories of works by a single artist? And I'll come back to that in a little bit because I think that when we think about changing the collection, while parity in numbers is very important, I think it's also there's another layer that we need to talk about, which is how do you build a collection through significant standout works. A lot of the collection changed from the late 70s onwards, and that was really fueled by the way that the Walker was thinking about its program and thinking about acquisitions. So that was a time of major solo shows by artists like Huang Yongping and Tatsumi Kudo and Helio Oitisuka, really important for solo shows for American artists like Julie Miretu, Kara Walker, Carrie Mae Weems, Lorna Simpson, Shirin Nashat, Nari Ward, and big group shows like How Latitudes Become Forms. So a time when the Walker was starting to really address these issues, whether on a national basis or on an international basis. And here are just a few images of the catalogs that relate to those kind of efforts, but also from some of the exhibitions. Julie is, of course, someone that you would have all seen recently here, and we were really happy to have the show come from the Whitney to the Walker. This really begs the question of how do you move the collection into the current times? How do you shift the collection? How do you think about it to embrace a diversity of perspectives, a diversity of lived experiences? Our acquisitions are guided by a long-range acquisitions plan, which is a strategic document that the Visual Arts Department generates every 5 years. We've been doing it since the 90s. It's a document which is a roadmap. We work on it for 16 to 18 months. I'm a little nervous by all the phones coming out taking pictures. It's a document that we work on for 16 to 18 months. We present it to the Acquisitions Committee, and then it gets approved by the board. This is the 2018 Long-Range Acquisitions Plan, and it is really an important touchstone for us. Our team meets every 2 weeks to talk about acquisitions, and we refer to the plan every time we meet. We're about to welcome new colleagues to the curatorial team. We're about to start working on the 2023 Long-Range Acquisitions Plan. And our collection is, it's a mid-sized collection. It's about 14,000 works by just over 2,300 artists. And so for us, when you look at this table of contents, you can kind of tell, you know, we're not like MoMA, we're not like the Tate, we're not trying to tell an art history, which is a pretty silly mandate anyway. But we are an institution that really looks at building areas of strength and areas of thematic coherence. When I think about our collection, I think that, you know, we're really there early for artists. If you look at our collection, we're really there from the start for many artists. We're very committed to acquiring works through commission, so the exhibition program is a very important way through which the collection is developed. A big area of concern for us is expanding the collection with a commitment to diversity, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. When I think of the collection, international artists, we have 36% of the works in our collection are by artists from outside of the US, which is, for an American institution, I think quite unusual. We're very committed to acquisitions of works by Minnesota artists. In an average fiscal year, about 20 to 23% of the works acquired are by artists living and working in Minnesota. And then an area of strength that I think is very special about the Walker are the interdisciplinary acquisitions. And you were talking, Sydney, before about how the collection is a way of growing people in a way. And I think these interdisciplinary acquisitions are also that. They're about challenging the way that we collect, challenging what Jane was saying earlier about this idea of hoarding or needing to have things. The interdisciplinary acquisitions that we've made, they really challenge objecthood, stewardship. They're also great opportunities for not only us, but also for the artists. They're often the first time they've ever parted with something and placed a work in a museum collection. So I won't talk in depth about specific acquisitions, but I'll just kind of keep these in the background when I just want to hone in a little bit on talking with a bit more intention about what it means to really think about expanding diversity in the collection. And I teased at it earlier because I think it's something that has to be talked about, on the one hand, in a highly qualitative way, but also in a highly quantitative way. And so I think that the main question chiefly is, of course, how does the collection embrace, how does it champion works that speak to a diversity of lived experiences? And how can we connect those to a diverse audience? I think that's the most important question that faces us in our collection today. And from a quantitative side, how do we change the demographic makeup of the collection with integrity and with commitment to the artists and to the vision of their works? And of course, how do we do that without instrumentalizing artists, their works, and tokenizing artists' works? And so for us, as we look at the long-range acquisitions plan and as we move into a new plan, I think a lot of areas that are key concerns for us are really thinking about artists whose works reflect diasporic and migratory experiences. We're thinking about artists who are exploring embodiment at the intersection of race, gender, sexuality, and ability. We're thinking about human and artificial intelligence, and we're also thinking about resource extraction, advanced capitalism, and sustainability. And in a way, this is where our founder comes back in. We're in a moment of reckoning with T.B. Walker's legacy, a person who really profited from the lumber trade of lumber taken from indigenous lands. And our new director, Merrie Cerruti, has been very focused on institutionally recognizing that and talking about that. And so working with indigenous stakeholders in Minneapolis, we've been moving towards land acknowledgement and thinking about how do we really meaningfully talk about that legacy of T.B. Walker's legacy? How do we also reflect that in the collection? So here are just some works that I think we're particularly proud of, but I think from a numbers perspective, another thing I want to say is that when I was looking at our collection, I was thinking like, okay, well, how long would it take to reach gender parity? And so I did the math, and it would take 50 years of exclusively buying 162 works by women artists to reach 50-50 gender parity, which is a wild thing to say out loud, isn't it? And so the question then is, how do you change the collection? How do you shift its narrative in a way that is meaningful? And I think the fact that we have hundreds of Robert Motherwell prints doesn't define our collection. When you think of the Walker's collection, there will be standout works that come to your mind. It might be that you know that we have the Merce Cunningham Dance Company archive, or it might be that you know that we were one of the first US museums to buy works by Kazuo Shiraga and Shozo Shimamoto. You might know that we have an amazing Matthew Barney installation, or you might know that we might have one of the earliest paintings by Sia Armajani. And I think it's those standout signature, I don't want to say high quality, I want to say high caliber, important works for these artists. That's what shapes, I think, in the larger sphere of discourse, that's what shapes, I think, your understanding of what our collection is. And through some of these works, through some of these acquisitions that we've been making, we've been really wanting to shift the story of our collection and to really champion these major acquisitions, whether it's for someone that we've been collecting since 2006, or an artist whose show we just commissioned and we acquired the entire exhibition. So that's how we're thinking about it at a kind of larger level, an artwork-driven level. But then I just want to finish by saying that we're also thinking about it at a highly, highly granular level, a really boring level, but a very, very important one. And that's by all of the administrative stuff that we're doing, all of these questions around equity, parity, diversifying the collection, changing the collection. It's made manifest in all of this minutia. It's made manifest in the questionnaire that we send to artists. It's made manifest in tracking dollar spend across our purchases. It's made manifest in being much, much tougher around gift giving and really thinking through how to bring gifts into the collection by working with people who want to shepherd their generosity towards the collection. It's about changing the way we communicate about the collection. And then finally, through very specific funded initiatives. Right now we have a curatorial fellow who's funded through the National Endowment for the Humanities, whose only role at the Walker is to go through all of our collection records, revise artist questionnaires, and reach out to artists to make sure that they can self-identify, so that when I tell you how many women artists there are in the collection or how many African-American artists there are in the collection, I'm telling you a number that is actually reflected through self-identification. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Kim, Jane, Ramsey, and the entire Whitney team for inviting me to speak on this panel. It's just wonderful to share the future stage with so many great colleagues and colleagues in the audience as well. So thank you. I'm excited to share some of my experiences expanding collections, which has been such a huge part of my curatorial practice. I'd like to talk about my experience across two institutions. First is my work at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, where over a 10-year period I was curator of Latinx art. And the second is some of my ongoing work at the National Gallery of Art, in my relatively new role there as Chief Curatorial and Conservation Officer. Both of these efforts have taken place at nationally identified institutions, albeit very different ones, although it doesn't seem so when you're looking at their facades. Both institutions share a commitment, and I would add responsibility, to representing the nation, a complex endeavor that requires that we both put into practice sophisticated ways of diversifying and interpreting our collections. Aligning museum collections to the audiences we serve has always been important, but has reached a fever pitch in the COVID era and following the global racial reckoning since 2020, when major museums had to turn more and more to their immediate audiences and face the reality of our troubled past and present. There's been a significant shift in thinking more intentionally about permanent collection displays and the routine ways we can make them more equitable and just. As many of you know, the National Gallery hosted the exhibition Afro-Atlantic Histories, and we had a couple of very special visitors, President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. I was struck by how Michelle Obama's note left in her comment book highlighted the importance of permanent collections. The subtext of her comment is that works in exhibitions like this, which focus largely on Black artists, should be on view all the time, not just for special exhibitions. This demonstrates a true commitment to the ideals of inclusion, where works by diverse artists are routinely interpreted, displayed, and preserved for future audiences. In fact, my dedication and belief in permanent collection work was inspired by the reality that for decades, Latinx artists tended to be displayed in temporary shows at large, non-culturally specific spaces. Flashes in the pan, here today, gone tomorrow. This contrasts with permanent collection spaces, which at both SAM and the National Gallery dominate in square footage over temporary exhibition space. This floor plan of the National Gallery's West Building, and this floor plan, this is a floor plan of the National Gallery's West Building. All the gray areas, for the most part, are devoted to permanent collection displays. What if museums invested the energy and attention we tend to devote to temporary exhibitions into our permanent collection displays? For me, all collection expansion efforts must begin with an assessment of where we are, followed by detailed planning. When I first arrived at SAM, I studied the makeup of the Latinx collection and created this lengthy working document where I tracked artists on my radar and noted my progress. During this early phase of my tenure, I focused my energies on building a solid collection of Latinx art, ensuring its aesthetic diversity and Latinx subgroup representation. I was extremely productive and more than doubled the museum's holding of Latinx art during my tenure. It helped that I had some concrete goals that I was working towards. Most of the exhibitions I organized at SAM were drawn from our expanded collections. 3 of these 4 exhibitions presented between 2013 and 2020 were each driven by major collecting initiatives. Down These Mean Streets, for instance, allowed me to bring in over 100 works by Latinx photographers that self-generated a productive context, which otherwise would have not existed. This acquisition exhibition model proved appropriate for that stage in the development of SAM's Latinx collection, establishing a strong and solid foundation, but it kept the collection more contained than it should have been in retrospect. Around 2019, I acquired Uprising of the Mujeres, a large-scale portable mural by the interdisciplinary artist, Chicana artist, Judy Baca. This was a transformative work in her career, created upon her return to Los Angeles after attending the Taller Sigueiros, a mural training workshop founded by David Alfaro Sigueiros in Cuernavaca, Mexico. Her exposure to Sigueiros' use of polyangular perspective animated her storytelling strategies, which in this case, she marshaled to tell the story of female labor leaders in the fields and in urban America. The way the mural centers Mexican-American resistance is made even more powerful when juxtaposed to another work in SAM's collection, this mural by Warren Hunter, a Texas-based WPA-era artist who created this labor-themed mural for the post office in Alice, Texas in 1939. Hunter's racialized and hierarchical depiction of Mexican Americans as dark-skinned and subordinate laborers toiling in the fields of Texas could not be more different in tone than Baca's mural. Bringing these 2 works together was an exciting part of this acquisition effort and signaled the possibility of what can be achieved when thinking deeply about conversations between existing collections and new works. This juxtaposition shows not only how Baca, as a Chicana muralist, helped redefine the practice of muralism in the United States, but how these 2 artists, working in different moments in time and working from their distinct subject positions, posit dramatically opposed ways of depicting Mexican-American life. At the National Gallery, I work in a very different context. Here, our collection of American art is joined to a much larger collection of European art. How do we begin to transform our holdings in light of our refreshed mission and vision that more assertively embraces being of and for all the people we serve? Here, our recent collection assessments starkly present the reality of gender, ethnic, and racial imbalance in our holdings. In 2020, 98% of our collection was work by white artists, and 92% of our collection represented works by male artists. This should come as no surprise for an institution that was founded with a deep dedication to European Old Master art, and which boasts many firsts, including the only Leonardo da Vinci in the Americas. We've also been tracking our recent collecting practices, particularly focusing on our purchased acquisitions, which have shifted since we adopted our new mission and rededicated ourselves to making our collections more inclusive. In these pie charts, you can compare how between 2018 and 2019, before the arrival of our new director, Kaywin Feldman, who led our museum in adopting our new mission statement, was 13%. 13% of all of our acquisitions were works by women artists, compared to 29% between 2021 and 2022. With respect to race and ethnicity, this shift has been even more dramatic. In 2018 to 2019, purchased works by BIPOC and internationally diverse artists was at 7%, compared to 15% between 2021 and 2022. Currently, I'm working with the curatorial staff to create a roadmap of where we go from here. I've been focused on dialoguing with our curators about new collecting and exhibition practices across our collecting areas, and working with them to create collection development plans that identify possibilities and priorities for our future growth. All of this is in anticipation of plans to install our permanent collection galleries, especially in our West building that currently houses our early modern European and US American holdings. Working with a cross-departmental team, I organized a series of panel discussions expressly for the staff to allow us to dig into different ways of conceiving our future collections and the stories we tell. We've heard from legendary scholars like Lowie Sims and others like Denise Morel from the Met, Wanda Nanibush from the Art Gallery of Ontario, Martina Droth from the Yale Center for British Art. We've tackled many important topics. What does diversification mean in the context of early modern European art? What has been our operative definition of European art, and what should it be today? How do we respectfully acknowledge Native presence at a national museum with practically no collections of historic Native art? How do we capitalize on our strength in European Christian art to think about global Christianity, a rubric that raises the specter of colonialism? These are some of the ways we're exploring our future growth in a way that is grounded in both our existing collection and potential new directions. Thank you.
Okay, is the microphone working? Yes, great. Thank you all so much for your amazing presentations. I think you've generated so many fantastic ideas, and it was really great to hear both the commonalities between certain institutions and your kind of questions around your collection, and also these very hyper-specific pieces that relate to certain collections. So I want to ensure that during this discussion, we do our best to really balance those within this idea of collecting practice, to balance this idea of the practical, boring administrative work, and also some of this more kind of bigger picture thinking about what our collections even look like today. I thought maybe we could pick up on something that you surfaced, Carmen, in fact, in your talk just now, that really struck a chord and we didn't talk about as specifically as a group, which was this kind of an institutional balance or thinking between what resources, what space, what time is given to collection exhibitions versus temporary exhibitions. And it's something that I know we at the Whitney have been thinking about a lot. It is a big part of the thinking around our collection strategic plan. But it would be interesting to hear from each of you. I know for the Studio Museum, a lot of this may just be more speculative and thinking about the new building. So if you don't mind, I would love to hear from each of you about how that's working in your institutions. Anyone can jump in. I'm gonna go down the line. Okay. So one thing that I kind of quickly came to realize when I began at the High was that only by uniting my collection and exhibition work would I get to do the kind of all of the different dimensions that we're talking about of care, of art, and of legacies that really goes into the kind of collection building and exhibition programs that I wanted to do. Because yes, the resources are very divided, and at the High we also have 7 curatorial departments. We not only generate a lot of our own shows, but we also are like everybody's first call when they want a Southern venue, so we take a lot of great shows like the Merrie show. So all to say that there's a lot of kind of competition for resources and space, and I've just found that by being very strategic and thinking about pockets of our collection, like our Nellie Mae Rowe collection, this Thornton Dial collection that we just really became the most significant institutional holding of his work, and thinking about the grants that exist. So the Luce Foundation funding this program, thank you, Luce. That's amazing, and really a testament to the fact that this kind of external support, the big foundation grants, can really make that work possible. And so that's been kind of my approach, is to be strategic about the landscape of available grants, of everything else that's going on at our institution, and try to find sweet spots where I'm getting to pursue as a curator both some of the collecting goals and deeper dimensions of scholarship and exhibition practice, all kind of at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that I came upon this strategy of connecting collection development work with exhibitions, in part because I was building a collection, right? That it might be harder to approach it that way if I was a curator of Italian art, for example, right? But that the position of really needing to create and build a collection in an expansive way required that I devote my time to collection building, and then to think about and use that in an operative way to generate exhibitions. It was very productive at that point. I think what I also was alluding to in my talk was the challenges of that, right? And the isolation of that, right? And that became much more evident as when I was at SAM, we started working on a reinstallation project that's still ongoing there. And it was at that point that I really was beginning to shift more into working in an integrated way with my colleagues. And I think I'm bringing more of that thinking to the work that I'm doing, at the National Gallery, which is necessary given its holdings, right? Given its trans-historical and global holdings. You sort of can't work in the same way that you might work at a nationally specific and nationally defined institution. You have to be much more synergetic, synergetic in your thinking.
As many of you know, the Studio Museum is currently closed for construction of our new building, which we hope, fingers crossed, will open in about 2 years. So historically, in the building that we formerly had, the museum did not have permanent collection galleries, designated collection galleries. What curators did was to create temporary shows based on works from the collection in order to activate the collection, what the Whitney has done for many years now as well, to bring out as many collection works as possible, so it wasn't a static long-term display of works from the collection. That is what we will continue to do in our new building when we reopen, as a way to really ensure that these works are coming out on view, and also as a way to rotate them out so that we can, as Sydney talked about, have a really dynamic loan program where we are lending works from our collection to other institutions. One of the things that is, I guess numbers-wise, since Pavel just spoke so beautifully about the Walker's collection, that is incredibly kind of significant in my time at the museum in the last 5.5 years, is that overall the collection has grown by, actually, it has more than quadrupled in 5 years. That is largely, of course, due to this amazing partnership we have with the Metropolitan Museum of Art with this James Van Der Zee archive. But even excluding the Van Der Zee works, it's increased by over 50%. So that, in and of itself, is going to lend really incredible opportunities to continue to engage with the collection in exhibitions, temporary exhibitions, when we do reopen in the new building.
Sydney, do you want to add anything? The Walker has a little bit inverse to what you were talking about, Carmen, because we have, I think, 20% of gallery spaces collection, and then 80 is temporary exhibitions. And we do have a designated space for collection exhibitions, which also are really thought of as a place for school curricula. So their approach is the interpretative approach is, I think, much deeper and richer. And it's also a place where we've been experimenting with different languages and connecting those exhibitions particularly to the Somali and the Hmong communities in Minneapolis. I think it's very interesting that when you look in at a collection show, it's not at all representative of what the collection is demographically. And I think that's really something worth remembering. And in terms of how we grow the collection, we usually acquire about 100 works a year, of which 25% are purchases, 75% are gifts. And I think in terms of the stats that you shared, Carmen, they're quite similar in the way that when we look at how the collection is growing, they're quite similar to what you shared. And I think that I realized just now that the last slides that I showed of all those works, those were actually almost all purchases. So I think we're very lucky that actually having funds, endowed funds, really allows us it allows the curatorial team to really make decisions that are really, really intentional, really important. They also allow us to purchase work that is highly experimental or work that doesn't have a market. So it's that purchasing independence is, I think, incredibly important.
Thank you all. I was thinking as you were speaking too about how oftentimes it's in the organization of these collection exhibitions, or even just in thinking around them, that we very quickly, in fact, identify gaps and omissions in the collection. And so there is this way that just in exhibition making, it really works so closely in tandem with collecting and with thinking about a collection, that it's always useful to have kind of the same people doing that. And I think that there is something that I was also thinking about a lot in each of your presentations, that every institution has its own kind of origin story. Each of your origin stories is quite different, and that there is often a desire when you're thinking about, you could decide to acquire any work that fits loosely within your mission. And that can be extremely overwhelming. Like, where do you begin? And there's so many factors involved, whether it's cost or accessibility, but something about how each of you spoke to like how that connects to your origin story of the institution was very interesting. So I wanted to pick up on that and think about how for certain institutions I was thinking about for the Studio Museum, it's just a great story that it's, it didn't mean to be a collecting institution, and it just happened based on the kind of mission and objectives of the founders, and how you've really taken that as, your own mission to kind of work with artists and to be experimental, and with other collections, especially these more kind of like, I don't want to say behemoth collections, but larger collections or collections that were founded many, many years ago that have these massive amounts of work and these concentrations in certain area, which Pavel and Jane and I have discussed. We have very, very similar statistics within the Whitney collection. How you deal with that, and is it through these? Many of you spoke to this kind of like punctuation marks. Is it that you can show, acquire a new work that then just changes the way a gallery feels? So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit more about that as well. And I know that was something that specifically Katherine, Carmen, and Pavel, you spoke about in your thinking about your acquisitions. I guess maybe it's sort of like punctuating acquisitions and also like integration of,
I think someone talked about surgical acquisitions, and there was something about that term which I thought was really great. But I think that the great thing of building an institutional collection is I think that each of these acquisitions that comes in carries the possibility of totally changing the collection. And so I think that when, of course, means are limited, so you can't do everything. So I think it's really a decision of, well, how do you choose? Which work is the one that can really, in a very rich way, shift narratives and meanings at many different layers. I think that's, for us, that's always a guiding question.
But, I don't know, am I on now? Okay, but I would also suggest, because at the Studio Museum we have this dual mission, kind of, and so in a way it's interesting because it forces us not to choose. That in fact we are deeply committed to the history and the historic collection that we have, but we're also actively engaged with new emerging artists that are, like, we are the first entry point into the art world, and that connects very deeply, and I always look to Connie because she has such a deep understanding of the collection. But the reality of the fact that the Studio Museum came into being was because many of these artists were not being collected, right? And so the fact that we were gifted artworks by artists was also a request for us to act as stewards of their visions and of their histories that would have been lost had we not been there for them. So, we have a deep responsibility to that, and also an ongoing commitment to just making sure it doesn't happen again by really supporting emerging artists.
I would just add to that in that, excuse me, I think perhaps some of the challenges we have as an institution at the Studio Museum is the reverse of some of these other institutions, and that because we have always been an institution focused on the work of living artists primarily, our collection primarily has been focused on the work of living artists. And so one of the kind of gaps that we have in our own institutional collection is going further back in time and thinking about what it means to have depth with works by artists working in the 19th or early 20th century, right? As the Studio Museum in Harlem, you would think that we would have a really fantastic collection of works by artists working in the Harlem Renaissance, and we don't, right? So what does that mean as an institution that really sits in a community that has such a rich artistic history in a location that has such a fantastic legacy of supporting the arts, and specifically supporting arts for Blacks in New York City, when we can't tell that story kind of across time? And so that, I think, is one of the main challenges that we have as an institution. We don't have that depth that other institutions have going back historically. And so how do we continue to balance this commitment to working with artists, living artists of African descent, emerging artists in particular, as we build the collection going back historically?
Yeah, I think at the National Gallery, we are at this point, at this stage in the way that we're thinking about building the collection, thinking very much strategically, about surgically, in terms of bringing in major works. For example, Faith Ringgold's A Flag is Waiting. That's a major work for our collection that we're so fortunate to have, which we haven't had because it's been on tour. But we're making many plans about how that's going to sort of the way that we're going to present it there, and the works that we're going to bring around it with it as the center and the focal point. But that's also challenging, right? That it's also challenging to think about, singular works and to really ensure that you're not marginalizing those works and that the force of gravity, the force of framing the conversation is not dominated by, the bulk of work in the collection, right? So how do you bring in, a work by, a Latin American colonial artist, let's say, into a collection of European art without it looking like it's derivative, if it's, so you have to really select well so that the work that you're trying to bring in is not, you're not reifying that marginalization, right? So it's a challenge, thinking strategically is not, or surgically is not easy. And it's really the work that has to be done, right? Thinking about strategies to do that work effectively.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's, as I showed you with some of the examples in my presentation, with all of the new acquisitions, especially those that are purchases where I'm using limited resources, I'm thinking about these intersections in the collection, not just how this work is going to perform within my department and within my collection galleries, but the many permutations and conversations that it can have across the collection, because that is the future of my field, right? This field of folk and self-taught art, which is really a part of American art, a part of 20th century and 21st century art and earlier. And institutions that are increasingly investing in this work and acquiring it for their permanent collections, they're going to be, charged with essentially displaying it within larger integrated galleries, right? And so I hope that at the High we can, try to continue our legacy of thought leadership in this field and stewardship in this field to model, how those kinds of meaningful conversations might happen. And I mentioned in the presentation briefly just that I always try to make sure that the didactic program is reflecting that, right? And really explaining in non-academic ways why these works of art kind of make sense together. So that we're not just doing kind of, looks like visual affinity based comparisons between artworks, but trying to connect on deeper levels of artistic intention, shared biographical history, shared materials, all those different sorts of meaningful kind of common grounds that can be identified between artists who did come from very different backgrounds.
I love what you just described of kind of how the artworks perform. And I think that's something that I think Jane and I are really excited to have that kind of idea coming out in this program today, because we don't typically have a symposium where we're really talking about collections like in this type of way, and that so much of this type of collection work is truly behind the scenes in an institution. And yet when we talk about it, we're, every one of those decisions in a gallery is thinking about, how this work, the works have lives. They have material lives, and they also have these other kind of experiential lives that are either brought out and amplified within a constellation of other works, or sometimes it doesn't work. So I think that's maybe an interesting way to kind of shift our conversation now into more of those behind the scenes collecting work, that side of things. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is, and kind of, I guess, curious about for all of you and your institutions, is how much, I hope it's okay to get into this, how much do you feel your institutions understand on a deep, real level the type of work that is involved in putting together a collection exhibition? I mean, I would say at the outset that it is something that I think there has been a real learning curve, an important one at the Whitney, and it's been in a way forced because of being in this building and because of a real change in the number of acquisitions coming in and the number of collection exhibitions. But that kind of punctuation mark has maybe helped because it really brought that type of work into high relief. And I'm curious how that work feels in your institutions. Sydney is smiling.
Maybe I start? Is
Go-
that why
go right
everybody's
ahead.
looking at me? I mean, it all starts with doing research, right? And to find an object, or even if you discover one in your storage, let's just say, you discover an object in your storage. Well, first of all, your storage has to be well organized. And I say that because we're really involved in a very active and ongoing collection move where I'm actually consolidating the collection of the Studio Museum, which has been disparate in various places, and I'm actually bringing it into a central place so that it is actually really accessible to the curators so that they can see these works. See them, then the next step is look at the information. Like, do we have all of the information on an object? And then going back to the curators and saying, we're missing some information here. I think you need to do a little research. And sometimes that means some artists have great archives and they have dealers or they have family or they have foundations, but there is a lot of artists that don't have that. So you really have to become a detective, find out where they lived, where their studios may have been, who their community might have been. You're doing such a deep dive into this, and that doesn't happen in days. That takes months, maybe years. So just starting with that. And then parallel to that happening is the condition of the work. Is it in good condition? How has it been stored? What has its history been outside of the museum? And then even within the museum, is it a museum that has had the resources to be able to store it properly? Maybe it hasn't. So what has been the result of the various types of situations that the artwork has been in? I mean, the questions are unending, and I'm in a room full of people who I see a lot of nodding heads, so I know get it. But, and that's investment, that's time. I mean, we're also trying to stay relevant and still trying to do active exhibitions of things that we can easily get up onto the walls because we already have that information. So, it's a balance of time, it's funding, it's interested people. You also have to pique the interest of people who want to do this work. And, there are so many different, I love curators, I love them. But there's a lot of other people who hold this information, and we need to remember that. Over the course of years, and I actually just had this conversation this morning where we were talking about some of these people, registrars, conservators, just a conservator I just recently even just celebrated having 50-year careers. They hold so much information, and we forget sometimes that they can be our resources. And so we need to kind of acknowledge that, recognize that longevity really breeds a lot of resources for us that are usable, and that we shouldn't lose that when they leave or move on. Like, somehow we have to capture what they hold. So that's
I would say at the Studio Museum, I came into the position in February 2017, and the person who held the position before me, Lauren Haynes, who's now at the Queens Museum, was in the position for 2 years. And so our title was Associate Curator Permanent Collection. And that was the first time, to my knowledge, in the institution's history where a curatorial position was designated specifically for the collection. And it was an acknowledgement back in 2000, I think, 14, when Thelma promoted Lauren into the position. There was an acknowledgement that it was needed, right? That the curatorial department actually needed someone who was focused on growing, researching, understanding the collection, not just for this particular moment, but for anticipation of our new building as well. What does it mean to care for a collection that has grown and expanded in sometimes unruly ways, given that we collected for 7, 8 years in the beginning without an official collecting policy. How do we steward this collection properly, given its exponential growth, given that we are now growing as an institution, working with, a department that now is fully exists, right? A department that focuses on collections management. And so that acknowledgement within the institution, I think, was really incredibly important. The fact that we do need curators who are focused on the collection, and it's been also helpful in that because Lauren and I have now served in these roles, the institution at large now understands the collection in really important ways, right? There's been more programming around the collection. There's been more interest in learning about the collection and diving deep into thinking about our collection history, our collection exhibitions in the past. And so engagement overall across the institution has increased as a result of, even a stated curatorial focus on thinking about the collection.
I think I would say that I feel very fortunate because the colleagues that I work with in registration are really partners in crime, I think. And I think that there's been a real shift because we work with some artists whose acquisitions and whose intentions behind acquisitions are really about rupturing ideas around stability and stability of objects. And I think that our registrars have really we've worked together on really thinking less about necessarily preserving something like it's something in amber, but preserving intent. And I think that that's really, it's really a kind of different way of thinking about how you care for something in your collection. And they're an amazing team, and we have some people that, have been there for 20, 25, 30 years. Evan, our technician, who has taken apart and put together Charles Ray's unpainted sculpture 8 times now, and knows the manual by heart. So I feel very fortunate that we have colleagues who are really partnering, not just with Curatorial, but partnering with artists and thinking through what it means to hold their works in the collection.
When I arrived at the National Gallery, we really were beginning to systematize a different way of approaching our acquisitions, like just formalize that process. Surprisingly, the way that acquisitions had been addressed at the National Gallery was very informal in terms of like the documentation when a new work comes in. So we're going through this whole process of coming up with new forms and all of that. And it was during these preliminary discussions that the real people who do the behind-the-scenes work, right, the curatorial assistants, the curatorial associates, the collection managers, said, let's look at duplicative processes, let's establish a working group to explore the life cycle of an acquisition from A to Z, from when it comes in the mind of a curator to it gets posted on the website, right? That whole process. So we're still in the middle of that. And we're trying to transfer a lot of processes digitally so that there's not a lot of paper and that you just have to input something once, because before you were sort of inputting information in all these different forms. So there's this kind of a streamlining that's going on. But that's a really important, conversation. And it's also important for curators to understand the importance of that effort. And now when I think about this new acquisitions proposal form that we have and we've been using for both gifts and purchases, I just think of it as the sort of the initial document on a work of art. It's the first file, the first, the first entry into this acquisition file that really starts the life of a work in our collection. So it's really it's important historically, right? It's sort of what our knowledge was and what we thought at that moment was important to talk and to raise about this work of art and what it means for us as an institution.
We'll have to talk about that another time offline because we're always engaged. We're calling it acquisition journeys. So yes. Sorry, Katie. Go ahead.
Oh no, I don't have much to add. Just to say that the High's been the very lucky recipient of a major collection care grant, which is the first in our institution's history from a local foundation, the Sarah Giles Moore Foundation. And so we're in this process, which is a 5-year process of surveying the collection, which is something that has only been done, as you're saying, kind of not always formally with every new acquisition, unfortunately, over the years. And it is truly eye-opening. I mean, it's a really just kind of evaluating, the way that the same kinds of objects are housed in different collections, like trying to create a best practice that's really practiced across the institution and not just uniquely by different curatorial departments is something that's just such important work. And yes, shout out to our registrars and collections team, because the work that they do is just so fundamental to making everything happen. And we're very lucky to have a great team at the High.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to say about our proposal forms, I'm very excited about them, is that it includes kind of other goals that we're trying to attain, right? So for example, at the moment of acquisition, after the work has been approved, we have a first visitor-centered description of it. So when it does eventually get accessioned, that can be reviewed and put on the website. So the information is already out there about this work. The same for description for vision loss, sort of short descriptions, so that it's accessible on that level as well. So all of that could happen at the moment of acquisition, so that we start doing what we're supposed to be doing from the get-go, right? Not later.
Sounds incredible. So, okay, so we would love to open up for questions from our audience here. I don't know if we're also pulling in questions from the live stream. No, we're not. Okay, so to the audience here. I think we have microphones going around too, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This has been really engaging. My question specifically to Pavel. I work at MoMA. I'm a collection specialist focused on acquisitions. And it's to your point about, and perhaps my question's an extension of what this discussion has been today. To your point about majority of your acquisitions are gifts as opposed to you actually acquiring. My question is, how do you all consider engaging with those people who are collecting and thereby will be those who will gift, in particular in the area of diversifying, right? I mean, it's an issue that we face. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, gift giving is very, very important because it constitutes such a key way of building the collection. As an institution, we're priced out of a lot of acquisitions. I shared those slides of Carmen Herrera and Jack Whitten. We don't really pursue through funds because we simply can't afford them historical work. It's very rare that we do that. So I think that there's very, very concerted effort around particular works that we know belong to individuals who care about the Walker, want to develop the Walker's collection, and we really work hard on convincing those individuals to gift. And then with living artists, I think it's also a big effort. We really spend a lot of time with people and spend time talking about art, sharing with them why we're interested in particular artists, helping them acquire works for the Walker. And so it's a constant dialogue, I think, and it's also I don't want to say education process in a patronizing way, but there is an element of that for sure. It's a way of sharing what we learn as curators with people who are passionate about our institution.
Hi, my name is Kirk. I'm a street photographer. I'm learning so much from this conversation y'all having. I document urban culture, and I'm in contact with a lot of different artists, self-taught, multi-racial, and you go outside, you see art all over, right? So I'm curious about your conversations on whether street art, street photography, graffiti is a category worth kind of looking at, especially like in the self-taught area and Latinx. Because Latinx is just a huge area in terms of graffiti and street art. So I'm kind of seeing if you have any views about that urban aesthetic that's growing, not just here in New York, but all over the world.
That's, yeah, so I'm based in Atlanta, where we certainly do have a lot of great street artists, and yeah, but it's not something that we currently have represented very much in the collection. We do have street photography. We have a massive photography collection. It's something else that is a distinguishing collection for the museum. So there is a fair amount of, I think, the kind of work that you might be interested in within the collection through our photography collection. But it's, I see it as very interesting and worthy. And so far, it just has not been a kind of strategic focus of our institution, and we haven't been offered to this kind of conversation around gifts being so important when it comes to collection development. We've never worked with an artist or a donor who's really kind of cultivated this area, but it's not something that we wouldn't do in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very important aspect of contemporary art. At both institutions, both at SAM had collections that were related to artists who worked in graffiti, who got their start there. And to some extent the National Gallery, but these, that's an area that could totally grow. I still have, a memory of, the one that got away at the Smithsonian American Art Museum that I still think about. It was a work by Lee Quinones, who is a graffiti artist from New York and working in the 70s and 80s, kind of like a classic graffiti artist. And I remember there was an absolutely beautiful drawing. He would paint on subway cars, and so what a lot of graffiti artists who painted it that way, they take notebooks or like a drawing. They draw out what they wanted to do, and then they take that to the yards and they paint. And it was this absolutely amazing drawing. I can't remember the title now. And he was able to paint it on a married couple, what's called a married couple. So in New York, subway cars, there's some subway cars that are permanently joined, and they're called married couples. And he was able to present this amazing narrative across 2 subway cars. And I still think about that drawing as the one that got away. It's like, oh, it was just so amazing. So anyway, yes, it's very important. Mm-hmm.
Hello, Saisha here. Hi, colleagues. I was thinking about the distinction or the language that comes up around permanent collection temporary shows, and sort of this idea of the temporary versus the permanent, and also the kind of tension between not wanting to create or take on the project of writing histories, the kind of the MoMA project, but then how do we create counter histories, and sort of what is the heft of longer term installations taking on some of the character of temporary or thematic or argumentation, and just sort of how we play with these different models to create the possibility of not just rotating through or having something feel temporary, but having these collections still have that power to rewrite or recast or really recalibrate how we understand histories as they have been given to us by institutions that maybe are more comfortable with a kind of permanency. So I'll put that out to you. Thanks.
Well, I'll take a little stab at that. I think it's a combination of things. I think from a practical standpoint, it is the wonderful acquisition sheet that you have where you're putting the effort into capturing that history, really, and doing all the work that in some cases we have to do after the fact, but doing it up front. And so you have a very robust and well-developed sense of an object and its intention and the needs that it has, and then you can share that, right? So that's a kind of an easy way to build that out and bring it to the forefront. And I think you can do that currently, but for more historical kinds of situations, we just need more time, and the same kind of time that you would put into building a temporary exhibition, actually. You would just build that time into doing that research and developing the information that would then make a very robust exhibition and presenting that, right? And presenting that for a longer term. I mean, I'm thinking about it in a very logically way, but.
I would say one of the nice things about these permanent collection temporary exhibitions, right, is that it allows you to bring out works sometimes on a regular basis within new contexts, right? So thinking about the same work exhibited in multiple temporary exhibitions so that you are continuing not only to show a work that might be, an icon of the collection or a fan favorite, but also being able to recontextualize it or to consider new ways in which you could present different research questions or, ideas that the artist presented or, things that curators or anyone else is interested in within, a thematic exhibition so that the audience is continually engaged maybe with the same object or, core set of objects in multiple ways. And so the idea of revisiting an object, right, and being able to see it anew within a new context, I think is one of the real benefits of having temporary collection shows because it's not, a long-term permanent installation in which you see it in dialogue with the same objects over and over again, but you're really thinking about it kind of in multiple ways.
I would just want to pick up on what the end of your question was around reevaluating histories, and I love the slide that you started with, Carmen, because it's kind of makes me think of how these institutions can be so intimidating because they kind of become these, they write the history, right? Particularly if you're just starting to think about art, they can be really imposing and intimidating. And I think for us, the Walker's collection is not one that really, the collection shows don't do that because we're not an encyclopedic institution. We don't have a huge collection, so I feel like we're liberated from that, but we certainly try to show moments where things have fallen between the cracks, works that haven't been championed, ways of making work that hasn't been championed, so there's certainly a part of that, but I feel like I don't have to contend with even just a building that's so, it becomes this altar almost.
Kind of interested in adding something with regard to your question as well, specific to the Whitney, which is that as you raise these questions of permanent and temporary, we have actually sort of shifted away from that language. So we don't, in fact, talk about the collection as a permanent collection, but simply the collection. And we don't use the word temporary necessarily with our exhibitions, maybe it's special exhibition program. But one way that I think we've been trying to sort of play with that ambiguity and with the fluidity between those ideas is in a very practical way with these sort of temporary thematic collection exhibitions that we've done. We've shifted away from incorporating into the title of such an exhibition blah 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 from the collection or from the Whitney's collection and integrated it like kind of later on. So it's been a question though as to whether or not we need to be more clear about that with our visitors. Like, is it important to foreground this is from the collection? And we've been sort of experimenting with that. So I really liked the question for that reason. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Katie? Or anyone else to add, Carmen?
Yeah, I think that I've just lost my train of thought. That thinking about, permanent collections as not permanent, right? That they're constantly evolving, constantly changing, I think is the way that many institutions are beginning to think about the future, right? And at least that was expressed when MoMA reopened. Things may have changed after the pandemic and all of that, but that was the intention. And it might be interesting to think about an installation more like a book with many chapters, right? And that you could periodically change certain chapters, but make the book and the concept really meaty, right? So that you're really conveying some powerful ideas, but that you have the opportunity to, over time, change different chapters so you could unravel a different layer of the onion in a way. So that might be a way to think about how to make these permanent exhibitions temporary and meaty.
Yeah, and to add to this discussion, so all of my collection galleries are thematic, except for there's a few kind of monographic displays of different artists. And I'm lucky and challenged by the fact that much of the work in my collection is also light sensitive. So that means that the light sensitive rotations that we do every 6 months, just as best practice for caring for our collection, means that I get the opportunity to be kind of constantly creating new kinds of installations within these larger themes. And I was very, in planning for the 2018 reinstallation, I had so many ideas for different themes, for different kind of mini shows. And I was careful to only select ones that had deep rotations, right, within them, so that there were ways that I could conceive of switching out different works for years to come that would still be true to the theme. And it does impact things like, the strategy behind certain acquisitions. So in building, for instance, the textile collection, part of why I wanted to do that is because we had so few textiles that we could barely ever show them, because we just had such a small group of textiles that could be rotated out on a regular basis. And so that's been a huge driver for why we've been so actively acquiring quilts, especially those made by Black women, so that's a kind of constant presence in our museum galleries, that anytime you come to the High, you're gonna see a great selection of 4 to 6 quilts on view. I think that's...
I'd just like to add on to what you're saying, that it's the notion of ongoing, that it's never ending. And I liked your idea of a book with many chapters, because what we learn today is just one part. We will learn more as we go forward and as people interact with these objects. So there's always more to be added to the story. And this work is not just a one and done kind of thing. It really is, it's generational, it changes by generation. Sometimes the way that we perceive something now will be completely different in 2 generations from now. So I feel deeply that I never want to hear about deaccessioning or getting rid of things, because what we don't value today, somebody else will value later. But I do understand why we consider those things.
Okay, I think we have come to conclusion of this panel. Thank you all so much for wonderful presentations and a great discussion, and thanks to all of you for your insightful questions as well. We will be breaking now. I'm looking for guidance here. We'll be breaking now. I'm going to pass it to Megan.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to take an hour for lunch. We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. If you are planning to return and you want to leave something on your seat, that's fine. We are expecting more people to come after lunch. So also ask, if you're coming back, to sit in the middle of a row and welcome newcomers, because this is an amazing turnout and we've only just begun. So thank you all so much for such a rich panel. That was a beautiful note to end on, and see you all at 1 o'clock.